Today we're going to study the Mahā Saḻ-āyatanika Sutta, M149, the Great Sixfold Sense-based Discourse. This is from SD 41.9. SD 41, chapter 9. Now this sutta appears rather long, but actually it is, the essence is very clear. It is a practice sutta. It's one of those very important suttas if we want to use it for reflection. This is where it's useful to spend a bit of time to understand the nature of Buddhist translation or sutta translation. Barring bad translation, we can say there are two basic kinds of sutta translation. The first kind can be said to be the worldly kind, the secular kind, or scholarly kind, if you like, where the translation is meant for popular reading, to attract readers, to sell books, to make money basically. The second translation can be called the spiritual translation, the practice translation, if you like, Dharma translation even. And that's the kind of translation where we keep to, as closely as possible, to the original intention of the teachings themselves, of the Buddha, of the Buddha's teaching. So this is where this sutta challenges us whether we want to present it in a worldly way or in a spiritual way, in the fullest sense of what the sutta can do for us as intended by the Buddha. I'm very happy and privileged to be able to translate this sutta in full. This is, as you know, the policy of the SD series. We translate all those teachings, especially for meditation, we give in full. If you look at the other major translations available of the sutta, the first one is by Ms. Harvey Honor, one-time president of the Pali Test Society. The translation is hardly 4 or 5 pages. And the latest translation by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi is even shorter still, about 3 pages. Whereas here we have about 14 pages, A4 size, whereas the other two books, they're kind of like half the A4. That's I think it's A3. Right? So, in other words, this sutta is given in full here, and this is very important to understand why it should be laid out in full. We have at least one practicing scholar, Mr. L.S. Cousins in the UK, who made a very important statement on the nature of translation. He says that when we translate a sutta, we should not miss out, we should not shorten it, we should not simply say etc., especially where the certain doctrines, certain parts repeat themselves. Because if those sections are meant to be truncated, abridged, shortened, that would have been the case in the original text. I mean, we can't imagine, it's hard to imagine the Buddha telling people, okay, I'm going to talk to you about five aggregates, etc., or form is impermanent, etc. You know, the Buddha always lay all these teachings in full. Of course, we're not sure exactly what words he used, but the idea of repetition is very important in the suttas. It's done in a special way. We don't read a sutta or meditation in a busy place, for example. Of course, you can read the sutta anywhere, but for full effect, it's just like meditation. Before your meditation, especially of difficulty meditation, the suttas can inspire us, can inspire you by reading in the silence and quiet of a forest or a very peaceful meditation hall, or anywhere where you are at peace with yourself, you want to meditate, and you read you don't have to read the whole sutta, certain passages that you like. Slowly you learn to love the sutta. You read the whole sutta until you commit it to memory, and you begin to recite it. Suttas are meant to be recited, they're meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt, and then you go into your meditation. That's what these suttas were originally intended for. Not for merely publishing in books and summarize and say, oh, do you know this sutta, do you know that sutta, and that's all. We stop right there. The suttas are meant to change our lives for the better. The suttas are meant to inspire us to move on to awakening in this life itself. Having said that, we can now look at the sutta. This sutta is divided into two unequal parts. The first part is the negative aspect, and then the second part, the longer part, is the positive aspect. And both this section, the whole sutta, deals with the six senses: the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the mind. In other words, this sutta talks about reflection on the six senses. And the six senses, or six sense doors, actually are the doors to our liberation. In other words, you can go through any of these six doors to be liberated. So these six sense doors, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. In other words, they can either be doors to suffering, to samsara, or they can also be doors to liberation, happiness, in other words. Another way of saying it is how we see things, how we hear things, how we smell things, how we taste things, how we feel things, how we think. The senses in themselves do not bring us suffering. It's how we use them. We don't say, for example, a knife cuts us, but we use the knife. Or if we are careless or unmindful with the knife, of course the knife will cut us. But if we are wise and careful with the knife is useful. In fact, in one of the suttas which we talked about last week or previously, the Buddha says that the robe of a monk is like a double-edged weapon, a sharp, double-edged weapon, covered with a cloth. In other words, if we're not careful wearing the robe, we mess ourselves up, we accumulate money, we live in a worldly way. As monks and nuns, we are destroying ourselves. We are falling from the top of the elephant down. So in other words, if we have taken the vow to be renunciants, we have to renounce. Not just renounce externally, but also renounce internally our distractions, defilements, and so on, so that we are enlightened. As lay people, we renounce whenever we can. We renounce the body, meaning the senses. We rest the body, so that the mind can be attended to all by itself. To clear the mind so that it is calm and wisdom arises. So that is meditation. Meditation is progressive renunciation. Anyone can do this. If we are Buddhists, we should be doing this. So this sutta is, once you know the structure, it's very easy. So the first part is shorter than the second part. The first part is kind of talking about how when we do not understand the six senses as they really are, this misunderstanding, this ignorance will bring suffering upon us. Meaning that if we do not really understand the nature of what we see, we simply get upset with what we don't like when we see something, or we get desires arise when we think we see something we like, we're going to suffer. In other words, whatever we see, we should reflect as being impermanent, all these things as being impermanent, in other words. Although this sutta reflects the nature of the highest awakening, the Arahat, we can apply it to our lives also on a simpler level. Practice as much as we can. Now, so the first part talks about this negative aspect. If we do not understand the true nature of the six senses, we bring suffering upon ourselves. It's a reflection on the six senses. Then the second part is even more amazing. The second part is longer, and it's got 5 big sections. I mean, it's got a series of teachings, and then there's a refrain. In other words, this part repeats itself after each of the six senses, and all the teachings are kind of included there. Now let me summarize the sutta first. According to my notes here, the first part can be summarized in this way. When we do not know or see the sense faculties and their functions as they really are, we would be aroused by them, measuring them, meaning liking them, disliking them, or ignoring them, so that craving increases, bringing on bodily and mental suffering. This is the first part, the negative part. Right? Now then, on the positive part, which is longer, the summary is like this. When we know and see the sense faculties as they really are, we would not be aroused by them. In other words, craving will not arise on their account. Then we would not measure them, meaning we won't be drawn to them or dislike them or ignore them. We know them for what they are. So the craving is abandoned. We dwell happily in body and mind. Having purified moral virtue, concentration and wisdom, having purified moral virtue, concentration and wisdom arise. In this sutta, there's something very interesting. Concentration and wisdom is mentioned first, and then moral virtue. We'll find out why this is so in a while. So, concentration and wisdom arise so that the Eightfold Path is cultivated, and along with this Eightfold Path, the 37 awakening factors, or rather limbs of awakening, also arise. But here in the sutta, they are given as the 7 sets. The 7 sets, you add them all up together, you get a total of the 37 awakening limbs, or limbs of awakening. And then both calm and insight arise. So here you see samatha vipassana mentioned together, arising together. He has, in other words, if we do this, then we have direct knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. Here meaning we comprehend, the first truth is to comprehend the nature of suffering. What is that? 5 aggregates. Number 2, we have to abandon craving. Here, this sutta mentions this person has abandoned ignorance and craving for existence. Number 3, he has cultivated calm and insight. Now here, the Noble Truth 3 and 4 have been switched to follow a normal progression. So number 3 is the cultivation of calm and insight, meditation. And number 4, he has realized true knowledge and liberation, right? Nirvana. So nirvana is here last in this sutta. This is probably the older sequence of the Four Noble Truths, where you have the truth that is suffering, second, the truth that is the arising of suffering, namely craving, then the truth that is the path, the Eightfold Path, or in this case meditation in the sutta, and then the last one, the goal itself, is nirvana. So you have 2 models of the Four Noble Truths, right? One is the one that we normally read about nowadays. You have suffering, arising of suffering, ending of suffering, which is nirvana, and then the last one is the path. But I think the older one, which is found in certain suttas, you have suffering, arising of suffering, and then the the path leading to it, and then nirvana, which actually is more logical, right? So you have two models. So both can be used depending on the context of the teaching. Right, so that's the summary. Now let's have a look at the sutta now, page 110. The Great Sixfold Sense-based Discourse. So here you see Mahā refers to the teaching itself. Not the sutta, but the teaching, the Great Sixfold Sense-based situation, if you like. So here, great means it's like a very comprehensive, very detailed analysis. Thus have I heard at one time the Blessed One was staying in Anathapindika's park in Jeta's grove near Savatthi. There the Blessed One addressed the monks, bhikshus. Bhante, the monks replied to the Blessed One in assent. The Blessed One said this. So now here you have the Buddha giving a Dhamma teaching unprompted. I will teach you, bhikshus, regarding the great six sense bases, Mahā Saḷ-āyatanika. Okay? Listen to it, pay close attention, I will speak. Yes, Bhante, the monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this. Right, so here you can see the big heading, one, that when the senses are not properly understood. Okay, so this is the first part. It's good to have an overview. Okay, now look for the second part, which is on page 114. Can you see the Roman number 2? When the senses are properly understood. So this goes cover right to the end of the sutta. Okay? Let's go back to the first part. When the senses are not properly understood, then each of these first part, you have 6 sections here, right? For each of the sense bases. So you must carefully study the first one. You only need to carefully study the first one. Make sure you understand that. And then the other 5 sections, kind of, they are templates. They kind of repeat the idea in the first section on the I. Round number 1, when the I is not properly understood. Now remember, this teaching is a fantastic insight into our minds. You know? So if you have a background in psychology, you have studied human nature, or comparative religion, or you just have an interest in the Dharma, this is an amazing document to study. 3.1, bhikshus. When the I is not known, not seen as it really is, when form is not known, not seen as it really is, when I consciousness is not known, not seen as it really is, when eye contact is not known, not seen as it really is, whatever that arises dependent on this eye contact that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral, that too is not known, not seen as it really is. Okay, look at this first part. It's very important to know what this first part is about. First of all, one more important characteristic of the Sutta discovery is we restructure the sentences, the phrases, even words, so that it's easy on the eye. Okay, you find in other books, everything is lumped into one. It's like a novel. It's very difficult to read. No wonder people say, wow, a sutta is difficult to read, because you have one big chunk there, like a piece of uncut cake. It's huge. So, oh dear, this is a big cake. I don't think I can finish eating this. But here we arrange everything nicely, bring out the keywords, showing you how the sutta is repeated, and you also see occasion in many places where the big chunks of passages, they are called pericopes or stop passages, where they repeat themselves, we italicize them. You will see a long passage italicized. That means that it is a repeat. The main one appears at the top. So here, the highlighted word is the I. So you at once know, okay, here the Buddha is talking about the I and their functions. Now the question is, how many functions the Buddha mentioned here? Okay, you got the I, and then the next one is form. Now you just look the second column, okay? I, form, eye consciousness, eye contact, right? So at once you have an idea of what the Buddha is talking about. He's talking about the nature of the eye faculty, right? So eye, form, eye consciousness. When this tree, the triangle, the eye form eye consciousness, you get eye contact. And when there's contact, there's feeling. So 3.2 actually deals with feeling. When there's eye contact, feeling arises. Through feeling, you begin to like something or dislike something or not care about it. Okay, this is of course the Ayatana model. But if you use the 5 aggregates model, the Panchakanda model, then of course you go on to talk about perception, right? Formation and so on. Here, we just want to reflect on the nature of seeing. So, the Buddha says, if we do not know what's going on when we see, with what happens with the eye, when there is form and then there is eye consciousness, in other words, there's attention, and then there is eye contact, the awareness, and then all these feelings arise. And at any stage, we've got to we've got to be aware of all the stages as being impermanent, in other words. Now, if we don't do that, then what happens? 3.3. Then one is aroused by the eye, one is aroused by form, one is aroused by eye consciousness, one is aroused by eye contact, one is aroused by whatever that arises dependent on this eye contact that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral. Okay, what's all this about? Now here again you see what's called a modern commentary, right? So the Sutta Discovery also is a modern commentary on the Sutta. So I'm commenting some of these things as far as I understand them. So here, of course, we can summarize all this and say that actually it's the mind that construes all these things. The point of this is listed means that at any stage here, desire can arise. If desire can arise, hatred also can arise. If desire and hatred, liking and disliking arise, that means delusion is present. So these are the three roots. So we've got to be aware at all the different stages. When we see the eye itself, when there is form out there, when there is consciousness, when there is contact, when the feelings arise, at any point we have to be aware that they're all impermanent. 3.4. When one dwells yoked and deluded by that arousing, seeking gratification, the 5 aggregates of clinging continue to pile up upon one. So, this is how the 5 aggregates arise. We continue to be aroused by what we see. We like, we don't like, or we don't care. And as we do that, we become more conscious. As we become more conscious, then we become conscious of this situation, then we perceive it like this, like that, and then we act on it through body, speech, and mind, that's formations, and then karma arises, and then that builds up our being. After all, we are the 5 aggregates ourselves. So this is a beautiful statement on the nature of the mind, using the idea of the 5 aggregates. We see the 5 aggregates in context here. Right? So next time you want to know, what did the Buddha talk about the 5 aggregates, how it arises and so on. This is the sutta, remember. Mahā Saḻ-āyatanika Sutta, or M149. Notice the sutta says, the 5 aggregates of clinging pile up upon us. So in other words, it's build up, and we keep on moving through samsara that way. 3.5. And one's craving, bringing rebirth, accompanied by delight and lust, running after pleasure here and there, increases for one. Right? So craving is like that. It just keeps on growing. It multiplies itself. It's like the replicators in one of those Stargate TV shows. Yeah? They build themselves up. They only have one aim, to increase their kind, and they eat up everything else. They destroy everything else. They just multiply themselves. And Richard Dawkins, I think, came up with a similar idea called memes. Memes also have the same idea, to replicate themselves. 3.6. One's bodily troubles to increase, one's mental troubles to increase. Right? So we become troubled body and mind. One's bodily burning to increases, one's mental burning to increases. Like your fever, burning, desire. One's bodily fevers to increase, one's mental fevers to increase. One experiences both bodily suffering and mental suffering, body and mind suffering. Right? You know, when people are in love, when they fall out of love, you find they become sick, they don't feel well, they might even die. Right? So the body affects the mind affects the body. So this is one section, one template if you like, on the I. So make sure you understand the structure, the words, the meaning, read the footnotes, then you begin to understand this section very well. And once you begin to understand this is called the word level. In other words, it's like an intellectual understanding. It's not going to bring you any enlightenment. Maybe it might help you to argue more with other people and show how clever you are with the suttas and stay on in samsara. But on the other hand, if you understand this and then you reflect, then you become more peaceful. Then you find that you don't really have to even talk about the suttas. You feel very happy, it's good enough for you. But of course, we want to share the sutta with others so that they can be happy too. So this is the first part. Now once you understand this, you find you just need to read the others by way of sutta puja, reflectively. You might even, like minus all my talk, just listen to the reading, or you can get some of the very beautiful voice, like those people who read the audiobooks. You read this like an audiobook, in a reflective way, not too dramatic, in a reflective way, like the Buddha's voice, as we call it, the voice of the really experienced meditation teacher. You find when people talk in a Dhamma talk, especially lay people, they tend to be a bit excited, dramatic. Well, I have to be slightly dramatic also, otherwise people fall asleep, which may help people with insomnia, but otherwise be useless. So the point is, in meditation, the tone, the voice has to be different. We have to be more than dulcet, so that the meditator can flow with the words and the feeling of the teacher's own mind and heart, if you like. So reading the sutta also is like that. It's meant to be read meditatively, heard meditatively, and then we go into meditation. Now let's look at the next section. The next section is the ear. When the ear is not properly understood, I'm just going to read this by way of reflection. 4.1. Pictures when the ear is not known, not seen as it really is. When sound is not known, not seen as it really is. When ear consciousness is not known, not seen as it really is. When ear contact is not known, not seen as it really is. Whatever that arises dependent on this ear contact that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral, that too is not known, not seen as it really is. One is aroused by the ear, one is aroused by sound, one is aroused by ear consciousness, one is aroused by ear contact, one is aroused by whatever that arises dependent on this ear contact that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral. When one dwells yoked and deluded by that arousing, seeking gratification, the 5 aggregates of clinging continue to pile up upon one. And one's craving, bringing rebirth, connected with delight and lust, running after pleasure here and there, increases for one. One's bodily troubles to increase, one's mental troubles to increase, one's bodily burning to increases. One's mental burning too increases. One's bodily fevers to increase. One's mental fevers to increase. One experiences both bodily suffering and mental suffering. Now when the nose is not properly understood, bhikshus, when the nose is not known, not seen as it really is, when smell is not known, not seen as it really is, when nose consciousness is not known, not seen as it really is, when nose contact is not known, not seen as it really is, whatever that arises dependent on this nose contact, that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral, that too is not known, not seen as it really is. One is aroused by the nose. One is aroused by smell. One is aroused by nose consciousness. One is aroused by nose contact. One is aroused by whatever that arises dependent on this nose contact, that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral. One dwells yoked and deluded by that arousing, seeking gratification. The five aggregates of clinging continue to pile up upon one. And one's craving, bringing rebirth, connected with delight and lust, running after pleasure here and there, increases for one. One's bodily troubles too increase. One's mental troubles too increase. One's bodily burning too increases. One's mental burning too increases. One's bodily fevers too increase. One's mental fevers too increase. One experiences both bodily suffering and mental suffering. So it goes on like that with the tongue, the body, and the mind. So I'm just reading you two passages to give you an idea of reflective reading. Now we come to the closing section, the more important section, positive section on how to cultivate the path, section 2, beginning with section 9.1. Right? So this is a section on the I. When the I is properly understood. Right? So here the Buddha begins with but bhikshus. So but means just the opposite of the first section. When the I is known and seen as it really is, when form is known and seen as it really is, when I consciousness is known and seen as it really is, when eye contact is known and seen as it really is, whatever that arises dependent on this eye contact that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral, that too is known and seen as it really is. Okay, now if you look at the footnote 31, the commentary says here, there's MA volume 5, page 104. It says here the meaning of as it really is, yata bhuta. It means one knows and sees the I, etc., by way of insight knowledge and path knowledge. In other words, this is leading to awakening, expression arahat. So if you merely take this commentary, you will say, wow, I don't think I can benefit from this sutta, I'm a layman and I don't think I can practice all these things. So this is where the commentary is talking about high level for the monks, the renunciants. So something is missing here. The missing part is the teachings, the practice of the layman. Remember the Buddha in the Dhammadina Sutta, for example, encourages lay people also to study profound suttas like this one. So even to Anathapindika in the Anathapindiko the Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya. So in other words here, what is it that we should do as lay people? Again here you find me repeating all this ad nauseum. That you reflect on all this, the sense faculty and their functions as being impermanent. That's the magic word. I keep repeating this because we need to practice this. That's the key to the door to awakening. So if you reflect on this, the impermanence of all the eye faculty at all the different levels, then you begin to understand them, and it is laid out here what happens, right? So take for example, we say, when I is known and seen as it really is, understand it, accept it as impermanent. So this is our practice. Now, if we reflect in this way, then of course we go on to attain stream winning in this life itself, of which are often taught in other suttas. Right, so the Buddha continues at 9.2. It says, if you reflect on the eye form, eye consciousness, eye contact, and so on. 9.3, one is not aroused by the eye. One is not aroused by form. One is not aroused by eye consciousness. One is not aroused by eye contact. One is not aroused by whatever that arises dependent on eye contact. So in other words, that's how you don't get carried away by the eye, in other words. So this is where the eye actually serves to guide you, to help you, to teach you, to free you from suffering. In other words, this body, it becomes a vehicle for awakening, not a vehicle to suffering states. Like this, our body, meaning our body and mind, can bring us to suffering or bring us to liberation. It's the choice we make. Then comes the refrain. After this, you have this whole chunk from 9.4 right up to quite long, it's longer than the main passage, to 11.4, right? So this is called the refrain, the chorus. It repeats itself. It tells you the benefit, what to do, and the benefits of this practice. Look at 9.4. When one does not dwell yoked, not deluded by that arousing, not seeking gratification, the 5 aggregates of clinging do not continue to pile up upon one. And one's craving that which brings, it's not that should be brings, it's not typo here, which brings rebirth, accompanied by delight, and last, running after pleasure here and there is abundant by one, right? So that's how you let go of craving, by understanding the nature of the eye faculty. 9.6. One's bodily troubles too is abandoned, one's mental troubles too is abandoned, one's bodily burning too is abandoned, one's mental burning too is abandoned, one's bodily fevers too is abandoned, one's mental fevers too is abandoned, are abandoned rather. One experiences both bodily happiness and mental happiness. So here is where we have a teaching which is very useful in Buddhist counseling. Someone comes to us and say, oh, you know, I'm very depressed, I'm worried, I have anger problems, things like that. So we teach them to understand the nature of the faculties. When we see something, we get angry. And then why do we get angry? Because we keep on perceiving something from the past, connecting that negative idea to the present, we get angry. Right? So in other words, this is the way to explain people so that they are understanding and they are empowered to deal with their negative emotions. So this is not just reading a sutta, chanting, and showing your piety. These are ways of healing ourselves, and bringing ourselves towards liberation. So body and mind are happy. That's 9.6. Then 10.1, for one whose view is in accordance with true reality, there is right view. Okay, now this is the eightfold path begins. Right? This is the one I was telling about. Sila, Samadhi, Panya, or the 3 trainings. You have Samadhi and Panya coming first, and then Sila later on, moral virtue later on. So concentration and wisdom is mentioned first. Here, because the Buddha is talking about this, it's a meditation level here, actually, reflection level. So for one whose view is in accordance with true reality, that is right view, right? So if you look at everything as being impermanent, the eye is impermanent, form is impermanent, eye consciousness is impermanent, eye contact is impermanent, this feeling based on the eye are impermanent, that is right view. For one whose thought is in accordance with true reality, there is right thought. For one whose effort is in accordance with true reality, there is right effort. Okay, this right effort onwards is the wisdom is the concentration aspect. Okay, the first two are wisdom aspect. For one whose mindfulness is in accordance with true reality, there is right mindfulness. For one whose samadhi is in accordance with true reality, there is samadhi. So this last three is the training in mental concentration. First two, training in insight wisdom. So if you read up to this point, you may think, did the Buddha live out moral training, right? Sila Sikha? Well, it's in the next section, 10.2. However, his bodily action, verbal action, and livelihood, right? These are the remaining three of the, what they call the 8 factors. They have been utterly purified earlier on, right? So in other words, this is the practice of moral virtue before this. So here is where you see there is a kind of a reminder. You got to practice your precepts well, keep up your moral virtue. Thus, for him, this Noble Eightfold Path has been brought to fulfillment by cultivation. So that's how the 3 trainings are complete. And then, with the 3 trainings complete, then the teachings become clear. In other words, you can see these 3 trainings in different ways. What you have experienced can be seen in 7 ways. And they're called the 7 sets. And this is a very ancient way of classifying the Buddha's teachings. If you like, what are the main ideas behind the Buddha's teachings? What kind of approaches did the Buddha use when he teaches the Dharma? You can say he uses 7 main teaching models, if you like. So these are called the 7 sets. Through having thus cultivated this Noble Eightfold Path, he brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 4 Satipatthanas too, or the 4 focuses of mindfulness. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 4 right strivings too, right efforts. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 4 paths to spiritual power too, the Iddhipadas. He brings to cultivation the 5 spiritual powers too. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 7 awakening factors too. Right? So you total all this up, 8, 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 7. You total up, you get 37 limbs of awakening, Bodhipakkhiya Dhammas. The word Bodhipakkhiya Dhamma is a later term. So in the suttas, there's no collective term for this, except for Bodhipakkhiya Dhamma, which is a late term. So you just listed like that. You find this listing in the Mahaparipana Sutta also. This list probably started to be compiled during the second period of the Buddha's ministry. Second period is like the last 25 years, because in the first 20 years the Buddha kind of taught very freely, very informally, and slowly, gradually the ideas of form became clearer, the teachings became more systematic, and you have the 7 sets. So 7 sets, the Dharma as teaching, Dharma as doctrine, if you like. Then, okay, this is learning the Dharma, and then when you understand this Dharma, the purpose of the Dharma is mental cultivation. 10.5 says, 2 states, samatha and vipassana, calm and insight, occur as yoked together to him. Right? So notice the path consisting of the 7 sets. When you practice, that's the Dharma you will realize. And in that practice, you will see calm and insight yoked together. Calm is when you attain jhana, for example. Insight is the wisdom that follows. They don't arise together in the sense like, together, but it's kind of one after the other in rapid succession. Right? Calm insight, calm insight, calm insight. Clear mind, calm mind becomes clear mind. Clear mind helps to have a calm mind. A calm mind clears the mind further, and so on like that. Both calm and insight work together. It's just like you say, I'm taking food. I'm taking my food with curry. I mean, you don't exactly, kind of like eat them together. You got to take one and then put to your mouth. Or you got to mix them together, yes, but they're still like separate, and then you chew them in your mouth, right? So they're kind of separate at first, but the result is kind of conjoined, if you like. The result is wisdom. And then comes a very important section. The section is important. You can see there's a subheader there in the center, the Four Noble Truths. So this is the ending part where you really begin to understand the true nature of the Four Noble Truths. You see the Four Noble Truths through direct knowledge. You don't see this explanation so commonly elsewhere, but this is the very clear kind of teaching from the early texts. 10.6. Those things to be comprehended by higher knowledge or direct knowledge, he comprehends them by higher knowledge or direct knowledge. So here, in other words, he has attained a higher level of understanding. It's no more that critical mind or speculative mind, but it's a mind that sees things beautifully and appreciates. It's just like you see a beautiful moonlight, you see a beautiful sunset. You don't compare it with something, some scientific stuff you have learned. You just look at it, you enjoy it. It's really peaceful, it's really wonderful, you just feel happy. That's called direct knowledge. You're directly experiencing the sunset, you're directly experiencing this beautiful moonlight, or this beautiful landscape, or someone who's showing his or her love to you. You feel very good about it. Right? It's a direct experience. So this is comprehension, full knowledge. Those things to be abandoned by higher knowledge or direct knowledge, he abandons them by direct knowledge. Those things to be cultivated by direct knowledge, he cultivates them by direct knowledge. Those things to be realized by direct knowledge, he realizes them by direct knowledge. So you have four aspects here. The Four Noble Truth is spoken of by way of function. Something to be abandoned, first noble truth. Something to be comprehended, that's the first noble truth. Something to be abandoned, second noble truth. Something to be cultivated, third noble truth. Something to be realized, fourth noble truth. And then comes the catechism, question 11.1. And what things bhikshus should be comprehended by higher knowledge? The answer to this should be the five aggregates of clinging. That is to say, the aggregate of clinging that is form, the aggregate of clinging that is feeling, the aggregate of clinging that is perception, the aggregate of clinging that is formations, the aggregate of clinging that is consciousness. These are the five things that should be comprehended by direct knowledge. Right? So, this is another way of talking about what is suffering. What is suffering? Suffering are the five aggregates. Reflect on the nature of the five aggregates. Consciousness, form, feeling, perception. What did I miss out? Form, feeling, perception, formation, consciousness. Five aggregates. That is the real nature of suffering. Suffering here meaning they are unsatisfactory. That's the first noble truth. Fully understanding the nature of the aggregates. Next, and what things bhikshus should be abandoned by direct knowledge? Ignorance and craving for existence. Right? Ignorance should be abandoned. Ignorance means ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, not understanding the nature of the five aggregates. These are the things that should be abandoned by direct knowledge. And what things bhikshus should be cultivated by higher knowledge? Samatha and vipassana, calm and insight. Learning to calm your mind and clearing the mind. Calming, clearing. This is our telescope, our microscope, examining the truth. And what things bhikshus should be realized by higher knowledge or direct knowledge? Answer, true knowledge and liberation. Notice here Nirvana is not mentioned, but true knowledge, liberation. Right? So in other words, you know what's happening and you attain it. You attain that level. Vijja and vimutti. These are the things that should be realized by higher knowledge. But notice how long is this just the first part on the I. This is the positive aspect. Then once you understand this first part, you carefully study all the texts and the notes and the footnotes, reflect on the text. Then the other sections, you just read them and just reflect on them. So let me just read one more section for reflection to give you an idea of how it sounds like. Hopefully you can do this for yourself. I'm going to read to you reflectively the section on the ear. Well, let me read the section on the mind, it'll be more interesting, right? Because I'm going to read the mind to you. The mind starts on page 122. When the mind is properly understood. But bhikshus, when the mind is known and seen as it really is, when mind object or thought is known and seen as it really is, when mind consciousness is known and seen as it really is, when mind contact is known and seen as it really is, whatever that arises dependent on this mind contact that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral, that too is known as and seen as it really is. One is not aroused by the mind. One is not aroused by mind object or thought. One is not aroused by mind consciousness. One is not aroused by mind contact. One is not aroused too by whatever that arises dependent on this mind contact that is felt as pleasant or as painful or as neutral. When one does not dwell yoked, not deluded by that arousing, not seeking gratification, the 5 aggregates of clinging do not continue to pile up upon one. And one's craving, that which brings rebirth, accompanied by delight and lust, running after pleasure here and there, is abandoned by one. One's bodily troubles too is abandoned. One's mental troubles too is abandoned. One's bodily burning too is abandoned. One's mental burning too is abandoned. One's bodily fevers too are abandoned. One's mental fevers too are abandoned. One experiences both bodily happiness and mental happiness. For one whose view is in accordance with true reality, there is right view. For one whose thought is in accordance with true reality, there is right thought. For one whose effort is in accordance with true reality, there is right effort. For one whose mindfulness is in accordance with true reality, there is right mindfulness. For one whose samadhi is in accordance with true reality, there is right samadhi. However, his bodily action, verbal action, and livelihood have been utterly purified earlier on. Thus for him, this Noble Eightfold Path has been brought to fulfillment by cultivation. Through having cultivated this Noble Eightfold Path thus, he brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 4 focuses of mindfulness too. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 4 right strivings too. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 4 paths to spiritual power too. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 5 spiritual faculties too. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 5 spiritual powers too. He brings to fulfillment by cultivation the 7 awakening factors too. These 2 states, samatha and vipassana, calm and insight, occur as yoked together to him. These things are those things to be comprehended by direct knowledge, he comprehends them by direct knowledge. Those things to be abandoned by direct knowledge, he abandons them by direct knowledge. Those things to be cultivated by direct knowledge, he cultivates them by direct knowledge. Those things to be realized by direct knowledge, he realizes them by direct knowledge. And what things, bhikshus, should be comprehended by direct knowledge? The answer to this should be the 5 aggregates of clinging. That is to say, the aggregates of clinging, that is form, the aggregates of clinging, that is feeling, the aggregate of clinging, that is perception, the aggregate of clinging, that are formations, the aggregate of clinging, that is consciousness. These are the things that should be comprehended by higher knowledge. And what things, bhikshu, should be abandoned by higher knowledge or direct knowledge? Ignorance and craving for existence. These are the things that should be abandoned by direct knowledge. And what things, bhikshu, should be cultivated by direct knowledge? Samatha and vipassana, or calm and insight. These are the things that should be cultivated by direct knowledge. And what things, bhikshu, should be realized by direct knowledge? True knowledge and liberation. These are the things that should be realized by direct knowledge. The Blessed One said this, the monks joyfully approve of the Blessed One's word. So this is, notice here, the closing, the last sentence doesn't say so-and-so got enlightened or those monks became Srimanas or Arhats. In other words, this teaching is given for people like us today, for the purpose of those who will listen to the Dhamma later on. And we are fortunate enough to be able to have these texts with us, in other words. Now you find that there's this teaching on the 7 sets. If you are interested to study in detail the 7 sets, there's one volume. Which volume is that?
There's a footnote, footnote 17, page 109.
What does it say? Which volume?
10.1, SD 10.
Yeah, SD 10. In fact, the SD 10, the title is Limbs of Awakening. So you can go to our Dhammapada website, look for SD volume 10. All the 7 sets are given in some detail there, plus cross references, and you can read up what they all refer to. Yeah? Okay, so with that we end our study today. This is a time for a short reflection. Today we have heard the Mahā Saḻ-āyatanika Sutta, which is a very profound and effective teaching for us to remind us how to practice through reflection. Like eating our meal, we chew our food one spoonful at a time, bit by bit. So when we look at the sutta, although it appears long, we grasp the snake by the head, so to speak, and then we just reflect, beginning with a section which is the easiest, the most important, understand the section. From there we build up to understand the rest of the sutta. And in that way, our comprehension supports our practice. Once we begin to understand, joy arises in us. And this joy is what inspires us to sit peacefully, calmly, and to go on to have peace of mind in our meditation. This is the purpose, the use of the suttas. Not so much for intellectual enjoyment, more for spiritual bliss and for realizing liberation, nirvana. Reflecting in this way, we are creating very good mental karma by the power of such karma and the many good deeds we have been doing, our practice of generosity, keeping the precepts, our desire to learn the Dhamma, to be kind and helpful to others, and so on. By the power of all these good deeds we have done and we have been doing, may our minds be at peace in this life itself. May we especially attain spiritual liberation, namely stream winning in this life itself. In this moment of peace, too, let us send out our loving kindness to all those who have been kind to us, that they may be well and be happy. To our family and friends, that they may be well and happy. And also to those whom the Dhamma have not touched, that they may open up their hearts and feel the beauty and truth of the Dhamma, that they may be happy and liberated themselves. May all beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.